Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, depending on where you're dialing in from. Thank you all so much for joining us on how to recession-proof your startup. My name is Nicole Kakal, and I'm the founder and CEO of Forbes Ignite, and I'll be your moderator today. So Forbes Ignite is an innovation consultancy and changemaker network that works at the intersection of technology, sustainability, and social impact. Now, what I want to do is turn it over to Paulo and Christina to introduce themselves. And I know that Christina wants to say a few words about Vanta as well. Paulo?
Sure, I'll start. Thanks, Nicole. My name is Paulo Rodiguez, and I'm the head of international at Vanta. So I basically oversee the international expansion that we're currently doing both in the EMEA region and in the Asia Pacific region. Over to you, Christina.
Thanks, Paulo. I'm Christina Cacioppo, Vanta's CEO and co-founder, and excited to talk to you a little bit more about Vanta initially, and then broadly what we're seeing in the market. And so just brief overview of Vanta. We are a technology company based globally on a mission to secure the internet and protect consumer data. So we help companies from quickly scaling startups into ambitious enterprises both build their security programs, and then as they're building that internal security, start to demonstrate that, often through compliance certifications like SOC 2, ISO 27001, HIPAA, GDPR, and our new trust reports. And just a brief overview of the company. Some of the founding ideas actually started quite a bit ago, 2016. This was, if I could take you back to 2016, this was the US election and allegations of hacking every which way. It was Equifax, it was Uber, it was Sony, it was just this slew of high profile data breaches. So in kind of that milieu, started to think about how internet companies are securing themselves and how we can incent them to do that more and more. And realized that companies want to secure themselves. Everyone believes this is a good thing, but sometimes it is hard to prioritize that very important work. But when you think about demonstrating security and compliance, that provides a really good incentive for companies to prioritize a lot of the security work early. So we initially came to market in 2018, and by 2020 had surpassed $10 million in ARR. At that point, we were still a seed-funded company. So we were able to reach that milestone, which was just this great demonstration of product market fit relatively capital efficiently. The next year, 2021, we did raise our first institutional round of funding, that Series A. We raised a $50 million Series A from Sequoia. And that takes us to today. We raised our second round, our Series B, earlier this year, May, June 2022. So a very different fundraising environment, which I'm excited to get into a little bit with Paulo later in this.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Christina and Paulo. So to kick things off, I'd actually like to start with you, Christina. So in your view, what's the current economic climate around startups?
Yeah, so it does seem to be these days, there's a lot of bad news. There's a lot of doom and gloom. So different than 2021 when it felt like everything was growing and it was grow, grow, grow at all costs and lots of big dollar funding rounds. The 2022 environment, especially after kind of spring, April, May timeframe, feels like a lot of doom and gloom. You see this in the public markets. You see them in kind of bear market territory and all the stocks being down, including very strong established tech companies just down double-digit percentages. And we're starting to hear about down rounds and venture rounds with a lot of structure, and we hear about layoffs. And I think it's just different for startups because the last time there was really a macro recession, it was kind of 2008, 2009, and that was 10 plus years ago. And so there's almost a whole different cohort of folks working at startups now than were then. And so it's just a little different. And I kind of think of myself as very lucky because I saw some of that 08, 09 recession coming out of school, kind of into a recessionary job market and all the fun that entails. And ending up working at an early stage VC firm where there was a ton of emphasis on building businesses because there just wasn't the like go exuberance of, in that case, like early 2000s or now kind of the 2020 2021 period. But it's not all doom and gloom. I briefly mentioned, but we raised our Series B round, $110 million in April and May of 2022, and so happy to speak to that later. But it was a very different fundraising environment with like very different investor demands, and those rounds are still happening. Just puts a lot of pressure on, I think, the business fundamentals.
No, that is incredible. And congratulations, Christina, on the raise.
Thank you.
And so, Paulo, as the head of international for Vanta, can you tell us what you're seeing in Europe and globally?
Yeah, sure. So I think if we start globally, I think one of the things that we're seeing is what Christina alluded to, is that importance of security, privacy, and demonstrating that security and privacy through compliance, right? So we're seeing that across the board. I think it's very universal, which speaks to the universal problem that Vanta is actually solving. One of the things that are actually really interesting is that as companies started doing much more cross-border work, right? Like before, we would see startups in Spain only operating in Spain, startups in France only operating in France. Now, those companies are actually moving much faster into wider markets. So the need to prove their security and their compliance is much more important, because that allows them to unlock things that before were actually very difficult to achieve. And now you will have companies in the UK, companies in Ireland, in Germany, trying to do cross-EU relationships and business. And that's actually what we are seeing. I think COVID, in a way, actually, if we can see a bit of a silver lining in there, it really helped blur those boundaries and those really hard borders that existed before. And we're actually starting to see that fading away, even to the point that we are now working with a lot of European startups and Australian startups whose first port is actually the US. So they try to expand into the US before they even start expanding into Europe, which is probably a really nice trend to see in the international ecosystem.
No, that's incredible. And I'd love to know, Christina, how has the fundraising environment changed in your opinion, and what are investors looking for?
Yeah, it's changed a lot. So just a bit of context here, like my experience with this is raised Vanta Series A in early 2021, and then the Series B, as I mentioned, in kind of spring 2022. And in 2021, it was like growth at all costs. Like, how quickly are you growing? Like, what is your month over month or quarter over quarter revenue growth? That was the metric investors honed in on, and there wasn't a constraint, right? It was just like, how quickly are you growing? It does not matter how much you're spending, just grow. In 2022, it was different. 2022 was all about burn rate, and particularly like burn ratio, which is this measure of basically for every dollar you spend, how many dollars of revenue do you get? And so there was still an emphasis on revenue growth, but it was kind of on prudent revenue growth, right? And just like very different environment. And a lot of so kind of investors looked at different things, and then that caused us to operate differently internally. But just, yeah, very strong kind of grilling on how efficiently are you growing? We still expect you to grow, but we do not expect you to grow at all costs. We expect you to grow prudently. And so that was the big thing. I think also earlier in the year, there were a lot of investment funds that were reacting to the downturn in the public markets and trying to figure out, should we make more investments? Should we kind of lick our wounds? What should we do? Especially like the crossover funds, the funds that invest in both private and public companies. And that was just different because, again, in 2021, everyone was investing all their money into private companies. And so in 2022, there was this pullback where people were trying to figure out, hey, should I put my money in private companies or public companies or, real estate or something else? Just a lot more alternatives, which in practice made it, probably one, less money for startups and private companies, and two, just a higher hurdle, like a higher burden of proof for a startup to prove that they were a good investment.
So how has Vanta been able to navigate that higher hurdle that you just mentioned?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we are kind of fortunate, and again, I alluded to this, but our first, couple years of the company, we got to $10 million in revenue off of basically a $3 million seed round. And so we had this DNA of more internally of like more prudent growth. And honestly, I think some of that just comes from my earlier stint in venture capital, where I sort of realized kind of counterintuitively, the best way to get an investor to want to fund you is to not need their money. And so if you want venture funding, the best thing you can do, in fact, is like build a strong business that doesn't need them. And that will, again, counterintuitively make them want to fund you more. So that was kind of our playbook for the first couple of years. And then we did switch in 2021 because, again, I think, the market, everyone was demanding growth at all costs. But in some ways, it was easier for us to pull back to our roots because it was a motion we were more familiar with versus something we had to figure out how to do. So still a transition, but I think we were fortunate to have some of those muscles early on that we could go back and rely on.
Amazing. And just to dive in a little bit deeper about what Vanta does, can you give us a quick explanation of what Vanta does and the problem that you're trying to solve?
For sure. So really broadly, our mission is to secure the internet and protect consumer data. And so the way we do that is help other companies, and again, sometimes ambitious startups, sometimes high growth, enterprises. We help them build their security internally so that they are able to protect consumer data. And then once they have that security there, we help them demonstrate that to their customers and their buyers. And so we do that through certifications like, again, SOC 2, ISO 27001, GDPR. And the thinking really, it's very incentive-based. So thinking is, if we can help these companies, again, secure themselves and then start to demonstrate that security, we're opening up new markets for them, right? US companies can more easily sell into Europe. Startups can more easily sell into enterprises. And so there's this huge business incentive to go open up those new markets. And we can sort of harness that with the idea of, again, helping these companies secure themselves, secure all the consumer data they have, and ultimately bring about a more secure internet.
Amazing. I never had quite thought about it that way, where if you're able to secure these companies, it actually ties in very nicely with their business objectives and their ability to grow and expand. And so lots of startups today are now facing the challenge of scaling with minimal funding. Is there anything from your experience that other founders might learn from?
Yeah, I think, again, we talked about some of this, but just the best way to build a venture-backed business is in some ways to not build a business that needs venture funding. And so what that ends up meaning is trying to build for sustainable growth and scalable growth, and having a sense for, again, for every dollar we're spending, how much revenue are we getting, and trying to keep that as close to one, like a ratio of one as possible, if not lower. Again, I think last year's funding environment would tolerate, spend $5, get $1 for now. This year's funding environment is sort of like one at most, maybe 1.1, but no higher. And so that filters into all sorts of things. It filters into how quickly, the team hires, how the team thinks about go to market, and like how, you reach out to customers, how you think about supporting customers and ultimately providing more value to them over time versus chasing new logos, right? And so in some ways, I think actually a lot of the kind of methodologies of the like micro entrepreneur community or the bootstrapping community actually end up being really helpful, even if you don't fundamentally want to build like a bootstrap startup, because there's just a lot of discipline in that I think has served Vanta well, and I do think would serve other companies well too.
So tell us more about that. I know that you mentioned that when Vanta first started off, it was mostly a bootstrap venture. So can you expand a little bit more about that?
Yeah, again, we never kind of set out to be a bootstrap company, but just the thinking was if we can build a business that we believe in and has strong economics, other people will want to fund it, right? And so, there's that very practical piece. There's another piece of that actually about building our own intuition about what a good business is and looks like. And again, harkening back to the beginning of my career at a venture capital firm, you sort of see companies that I think would almost, not on purpose at all, but end up sort of outsourcing that thinking to a VC, right? Because this VC likes our business, we must have a good business, which may or may not be true. Like, the VCs are trying very hard, but then, if the VC doesn't like your business, does that mean it's bad? And just kind of that whiplash, right? And so in some ways, not having that like external credibility at Vanta forced us to develop an internal assessment of like, did we like our business? Did we think the business was good? That I think served us well in operating, it served us well in recruiting, it served us well in financing, because you could go out and talk to investors and be like, look, it's a good business. Like, let me know if you think it is, but I think it is. And that is just like a very different mode than going to an investor and being like, do you like my business? Like, so that was really helpful. I think the other part of that was, and that confidence, it was authentic. It wasn't sort of like glued on afterwards, right? Because we knew we could keep operating. We knew our burn rate. We knew we didn't need the money from them particularly. And so if they wanted it, great, we could accelerate things. But if they didn't, like, cool, we keep doing what we did. And so we were kind of able to like control our own destiny. And that was, again, helpful for the almost confidence building piece. But also it was just real, right? It wasn't like this one investor had the, power to dictate the company. It was just like, look, we like our business. If you want to join the club, would love to talk about that. If you don't want to join the club, like whatever, we're good. We're going to keep going. And so building that in at all levels, like not at all just me, but like everyone at Vanta was really important.
That is such an important mindset. It's really controlling your own destiny and having that confidence and authenticity to attract the right type of investor as well. So Christina, what other advice would you give to other founders?
Yeah, I think, we've talked a lot about doom and gloom, and I maybe I have particularly, but I just did want to say, it's not all bad news. The trope that I think is actually very true and real is that downturns are when great businesses are built, because you have to be more rigorous with these things. And so you end up building more rigor into the business. There's all these examples from Post.com crash, from PayPal or Salesforce, or 2008 when a Google or Facebook really got going. That, these companies are just different because they operated through that downturn. It does get easier to recruit, right? It's less about, if you don't grow 450% year over year for 4 years straight, you're in the trash heap. And so I think broadly to founders, if you can kind of weather the macro storm over the next 6 to 18 months, it's going to actually put your company in a very strong position in 18 months, and honestly a much stronger position than it would have been if it was 2021 boom times all the way through.
Absolutely. And Paulo, what advice would you give to startups around the globe who are trying to scale?
I think the first thing I would say is to play to your strengths, right? If you're already selling into a particular vertical today in your local market, when you push international, try to sell to that particular vertical. Don't change too many variables at the same time, because that will actually probably cause you problems, right? Control your environment as much as possible. And definitely push outside of your boundaries. It can be very daunting to go into a different market where you've lived all your life in your local market, and going somewhere else could feel scary and unknown. That's normal and that's totally good. But if you think about it, after COVID, boundaries have blurred a bit. People are okay with receiving services from different geographies. So it's a very good way for you to start testing those markets and understanding if your product could be successful there. The last thing I would say is don't aim for perfection. Right? You don't need to get there with an absolutely perfect model that works in every single edge case. Push forward and just keep iterating on what you're doing. And we see this in companies that we work with, where they're trying to push maybe into the US market, and maybe they don't have a SOC 2 compliance yet, but they're going towards it, right? And part of what we do at Vanta is try to help them demonstrate that progress towards compliance, so they can say, hey, listen, cut me some slack. I'm almost there. I'll be there in 2 months, but don't discard me just because of that, right? And just keep moving forward and keep iterating. At the end of the day, if the service is valuable to your customers, they will want to buy from you, and they will understand that you're in the progress of demonstrating that security and compliance to them, and they will have the patience to wait for you in that process. Get it started as early as possible. That would be my advice, because it does actually open doors. And as Christina mentioned before, it's a very good way for you to unlock new markets that you didn't have access to before.
I absolutely love what you said. It's all about progress, not perfection, right? And you also said something very interesting about scaling in more markets. And how are you able to advise people or companies that are just starting out who are trying to test and scale into new markets?
Yeah, so part of what we do is help them demonstrate security, right? That takes slightly different shapes and forms in different markets. And I think this is one of the things that Christina mastered in the very early days of Vanta, right? It's how do we do everything is almost the same, right? Like SOC 2, ISO 27001, they just want you to demonstrate that you're doing the right things and you're protecting your customers. That's the aim. Okay, it's a different booklet. It's done by different people. Essentially, at the core, you're trying to do the same thing. So I think based on that universal principle, what Vanta does and what we're trying to do in our international expansion is like adapt that to the market that our customers are at, right? How can you demonstrate your ability to secure your customer data in Europe? Okay, here's more or less how most people do it. And these are the frameworks that will allow you to achieve that versus in other geographies where you're doing it slightly different. But that's essentially how we're trying to advise people through our team of experts on how to get compliant in different places and how to demonstrate to your customers that you're worthy of their trust.
Absolutely. And so, Christina, practically speaking, what are you doing to prepare Vanta for a possible recession? And are you still hiring?
Yes. Okay. So we are definitely still hiring, as Paulo mentioned, across the globe. So very much outside the US as well. I think broadly, though, to your question about preparing Vanta for a recession, so this is no great insight at all, but I think downturns have a way of exposing products as nice to have or necessary to have, or vitamin versus painkiller. And we've always felt generally good about Vanta being more on the painkiller side, the need to have, right? This is an important part of scaling a company at an increasingly early stage today. A lot of our customers are two founders, basically, and that is the company. So not just something for big companies, but it's still something we think a lot about and are laser focused on. Like no company is immune to macro changes as much as, I might wish Vanta was, like that's just not reality. And so where we really kind of doubled down over the last couple of months is making Vanta increasingly invaluable to our companies. Paulo mentioned some of this. So we have the core of compliance certifications, SOC 2, ISO, GDPR, et cetera. We just launched 12 new certifications earlier this month and have have dozens more coming. And then also expanding into things that aren't just compliance certifications. So earlier in the summer, we launched trust reports, and Paulo alluded to these, but it's a way to say, hey, I'm working on a compliance certification, but I've actually got a lot of really good security information to share. And I'd like to share it with you, prospective customer, to start to build this trusted relationship. And so from our perspective, again, kind of making Vanta more invaluable to customers by just helping our customers grow their businesses more. And whether that is an increasing, plethora of compliance certifications or more of a real-time demonstration of security that the company controls, really trying to again, help our customers grow their businesses in this downturn.
And Paulo, what do you think about that?
I think, completely agree with what Christina said. It's like, this is a land of opportunity, right? Like there's a looming recession, but at the end of the day, when these things happen, there's opportunity to do business, right? You just need to be thoughtful on how you do that. And what we're seeing is that a lot of the companies that we work with, they're actually in that business. Hey, great opportunity for me to go and push to other markets because this service is needed beyond my borders. Let's roll up our sleeves and let's do it. And I think we are in a very unique position to help them do that. Like in a way, we're helping ourselves to help others recession-proof their companies. What we're doing right now is exactly that. International expansion, making sure that we are helping companies both in Europe and in Australia to go beyond borders, to demonstrate their trustworthiness to their customers, and essentially expand quite strongly our actual base in Dublin and Sydney, which is where we have our offices. To do so in a very customer-centric way, right? We started this journey early this year by placing customer success teams and customer support teams, because we realized that we were solving a very universal problem. Everybody needed Vanta, no matter where they were in the world. And we realized that time zone was actually an issue. So we started putting people in the right time zones to support them. And the more people we put in there, the more we realized that our customers demanded more, demanded us to be like understanding the market better, to tailor the support that we were giving them to something that was more appropriate to the region. And that's why we've been expanding so strongly in EMEA and APAC. So for anybody that's listening, we're hiring. We won't stop hiring in the short term. I think we have a long way to go, and there's plenty of opportunity for a lot of startups. There's certainly a lot of opportunity for Vanta in this market, and we want people to join us. So I'll use my 30 seconds of fame to point people to our careers page, because we'd love to hear from them.
Absolutely. That is wonderful. And I just wanted to say that you'll never learn more about your business than incorporating customer feedback. So congratulations to all of you and your expansion as well. And so, well, Christina and Paul, let me do that again. So Christina and Paulo, thank you so much for being here. It is such a pleasure speaking with you. And thank you everyone for joining. And to learn more about Vanta, please visit their website, www.vanta.com.